Hoyer would be the starting quarterback. There's a difference, obviously, between Belichick and everybody else, but, Jim Harbaugh's another one of those guys. He's got the cachet to say, this is the way it's going to be. Mike Pettine doesn't have that yet.
No, absolutely. You guys are listening to the Sports Fix. J-Rock, John McMullen, talking, of course, about Johnny football. John Manziel becoming the starter. Browns and Bengals coming up here, and all great points you're making. I just laughed because somebody posted in our one of our Facebook pages here a photo, a live drop-in from Marvin Lewis's press conference where Fox 8 News here in Cleveland sent Little John Rinaldi to sit directly in front of Marvin Lewis. This picture is great because Marvin Lewis is literally staring at Little John. The reason he's Little John is because he is one of the little people of America, and he's a famous television personality locally here in Cleveland. They've had one of those like a Goulardi, one of those late night type movie shows on Saturday nights for 30 years, 40 years, however long Big Chuck and Little John's been on the air. But anyways, this photo is great because it looks like Marvin Lewis is just staring. Little John sat in the seat that's directly in front of Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis has his arms folded, and you could just feel the picture. You could feel like you're in the room. But anyways, looking at Marvin Lewis, I wanted to ask you your thoughts earlier this week. The big hullabaloo now that he called John Manziel a midget on the radio. I was not shocked that people in the NFL feel that way. I was not shocked because there are a lot of people, believe it or not, Manziel fans, a lot of people in the NFL licking their chops to see him get in because they think the opposite of what a lot of people think. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I was very surprised that a veteran coach like Marvin Lewis would slip up. There's a difference between bulletin board material and a direct insult at somebody, and never mind the fact that it's also seen in a bad light as far as it's a word that you don't use anymore to describe little people. But what was he thinking, taking such a blatant shot like that? Is he that not worried about the rookie quarterback, or was he just not thinking?
I do a lot of radio shows, and sometimes when you talk, you say things you don't mean to say.
I know that, bro. I do it every day.
Yeah, when things are off the cuff, you say some things that you don't want to say, and on one hand, I'm like, we just have to stop as a society. We have to stop with this sensitivity, and who cares? As at the end of the day, is how I see it. Should he have done it? Obviously not. Marvin Lewis should understand at this point that you basically can't say anything to anybody at any point. Obviously it's a mistake on his part. There's no question about that. As far as whether it'll fire up the Cleveland Browns, bulletin board material. If they need bulletin board material for this game,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't buy a lot of that. I don't put a lot of stock into that. There's a mentality in the NFL, and it's been there for years, is that short guys can't play the quarterback position, and generally 5'11" guys are going to have difficulty, and that's just part of the reason. I mean, look at the offensive linemen. 6'3" to 6'6", defensive linemen 6. It's just a natural. You got to figure out a way to get the ball over them or around them somehow, and that's easier for a 6'5" guy. It's just, common sense. So there's that mentality. It's shifted over the past few years because Russell Wilson won a Super Bowl, and Drew Brees won one a few years before that. Russell's 5'11", Drew's 6 foot, and they did it in different fashions. Obviously, Wilson's more of a movement-based guy. Brees, though, pure pocket passer, and he's been able to figure it out. So it depends more on talent than anything else, obviously, because there's a whole bunch of 6'5" stiffs who can't play the quarterback position, so there's a lot more that comes into it. It's just a mentality, though. If you have a guy who can play, you'd rather have him be 6'5" than 5'11". That's basically what it is.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you on that. And as far as the Marvin Lewis thing, I'm in your corner. I am anti all of this PC and this walking on eggshells world that we live in. I believe that, nobody should feel lesser than anybody else, but I believe that people take that way too far in the opposite direction. So I'm not even going there. You got to realize, guys, I come from the world of pro wrestling where one of the biggest attractions traditionally is midget matches. And let me just tell you that I'm friends with a whole lot of those guys, and they're every bit one of the boys just like me. They have no interest in being called little wrestlers, little people wrestlers. They're midgets. They don't care. But I'm just saying, that's the world we live in, so maybe it's way more offensive to other people, and so I'm not going to make judgments on that. But I was on the other side of it. I didn't even get into that side. Just in general, insulting somebody on the other team so openly. It's not done very often, but to me it speaks to perhaps lack of worry or respect for the opponent, which is a reality some people have. I'm telling you, I've had some guys tell me that there's cats licking their chops using those terms to see him get out there on the field. And I do want to mention something else too, John. Just curious where you're at with this, but I've already talked to a couple of guys, and I'm just being honest here. The body language on this team and the way they play this weekend is going to tell me a lot. Now, I do expect a spark because the stadium's going to be jumping because you'll have the rookie in there and all of that. I do, and it's the last home game of the season. Don't discount that as well as a reason why the Browns went ahead and did what they did this week, because they wanted to give the fans one look at the kid before they put him away at home for the rest of the winter. But anyways, keep in mind the locker room. There's still guys, and I mean, I've been told this myself this morning. There's not everybody in the locker room that thought this was the best decision that the Browns could have made this week. Now, I'm not acting like there's an uproar. Guys are going to show up and go to work, but it's a little split, which we kind of, I think a lot of people knew that may happen. There is a voice in the locker room of a group of players that feels that this was not the right decision to make this week, and they, but then there's another group that's all for it. You're going to have that as part of the thing, but keep that in mind. It'll be interesting to see the way they play. And speaking of how guys react, sparks, you brought up Josh Gordon, John, at the beginning of this, and I'm just going to throw this out there because he's already got 18 strikes against him as it is, but I would go so far as to say that if Josh Gordon this week and beyond this season shows up and is not dogging it, is not making the same mistakes that he's made, the same wrong. I'm just saying, if he shows up with a different hustle, if I'm the Browns, the first thing I do this offseason is find a way to part ways with him, because anybody that can prove at that point, to me, that proves whether or not you were intentionally switching your switch or not. And at that point, when you decide you're going to play and not going to play, I've got no place for you on my team. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he plays as well.
Yeah, it's tough to move. We've talked about it before. I've advocated moving on from him before because of the other issues, obviously. And I just think you always have that hanging over you. But it's tough to walk away from that kind of talent. We all understand that. And especially when you understand there's going to be teams lining up, and God forbid if he signs within the division, and then all of a sudden you got to face him twice a year. So there, it's easier said than done. He's one of those guys you mentioned. Anytime you have a quarterback controversy, you're going to have, part of the locker room for one guy, part of the locker room for another guy. But he's definitely one of the guys in Manzel's corner. There's no question about that. And it tends to be. I talked about a little bit with Michael Vick. Guys with tremendous amounts of talent, and Josh Gordon's one of those. There's no question about that. They just want talent. That's all they see. And as we say, there's no question Johnny Manziel has a better skill set than Brian Hoyer. There is absolutely no question. It's not even close. No doubt. So to a guy like Josh Gordon, he just sees that and says, why isn't Johnny Manziel playing? And that's why I bring up that Michael Vick, because I talked about it. If you go into an NFL locker room, there are a lot of guys who talk about Michael Vick like he's Johnny Unitas, like he's Joe Montana.
Yeah, they do. They do.
John Elway. And he's not. History proves he's done some good things. But overall, you would have to rate him, taking the off the field issues and the stall in his career, even taking that out of it, you would have to rate him as overall a bit of a disappointment more than anything else. But yet there's a whole generation of players who think he's a superstar.
Yeah, one
just
of the
because
best.
I don't think anyone has ever had a better skill set than Michael Vick. And that's why. And you know, they don't see the other aspects of the position. You'd be astonished. I always tell people, you would be astonished at just how little, and I'm not saying this about Josh Gordon because I don't know it for a fact, but you would be astonished how many football players don't know all that much about football. They just go about their business. If they're a wide receiver, they understand how to play wide receiver, but don't understand the whole concept of the game going on around them, as far as, you know, certainly the quarterback position, the defensive side of the ball, what have you. There are a lot of players like that. And they just look at guys and say, wow, that guy's a great athlete. And if you line up Johnny Manziel and Brian Hoyer on a field in shorts and a shirt, Johnny Manziel is going to look better every single time. Doesn't mean he's a better quarterback. Just means he's got better physical gifts. And that's where I think a guy like Josh Gordon is coming from.
Right, absolutely. But what you said at the beginning of that, I want to go back to it. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were talking, but, you know, I get because I'm all about the talent side of it. Like, you know, whether it's in radio, wrestling, different things that I've done, being in the management side of things, I understand what people don't like, the reality that talent gets away with things. You are allowed to. It's not fair. Everybody should play under the same set of rules, but I think we all know that there is a slightly different set of rules for superstars and for higher levels of talent than there are for others. You know what I mean? And that's just the realities of the world. But what you said kind of trips me, because when you're getting into an effort, now I'm not talking about guys showing up late or guys partying and stuff like that. I'm talking about the actual on the field effort that you give. And once you realize that a guy has already for you, and I'm not saying this about Gordon in particular, but when you realize that a player has already chosen when he's going to give you more effort and when he's not, at that point, that's almost like being blackmailed. Like, I get it that he has talent that is all world, but if he's going to decide when he's going to show up and when he's not, I don't know how I can have any place on my team for a guy like that. Regardless of his talent, I'm going to try to sucker somebody else into trading for him, and they can deal with this issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, you guys are closer to the Browns than I am, so I can't speak to that as far as I'm hoping he's having difficulties because of the time off, and that's what I said.
So too.
You do need an effort. But the only thing I can tell you, and I always point to this, and because of his reputation, I watched Randy Moss practice every single day for about the first 7 years of his NFL career.
Oh, you were in Minnesota, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the narrative was that he was a lazy player and he gave effort when he wanted to.
Is that true? I mean, you were there every day.
Completely the opposite. Completely the opposite. In fact, he tore his hamstring one year. He had never missed a game. He had never missed a practice in his first 6 or 7 years in the league. Tore his hamstring and still played that week. Eventually had to be shut down. But my point is, because of his reputation, because he could be surly at times, you know, the camera was on him at all times. As I said, watch a wide receiver. It doesn't matter who the wide receiver is. Think about who you think is the hardest working wide receiver in the NFL. When they are not involved in a play, they will occasionally walk off the line of scrimmage, you know, put their hands on the defensive back, and not do a lot. Because they are playing a position where they need a breather, especially if you run as many deep routes as Randy Moss or a player like that used to do. And you know, because of the reputation, because of the narrative, the camera would be on him every play, and everybody would jump on when he would come off the line of scrimmage and like, oh, Randy Moss is not giving 100%. You know, it just wasn't true.